Okay, turn 3, and first thing you have to do is test for initiative again to see which side has initiative. It's going to be the same as before, the same as in turn 2. Russians are going to roll 5 dice as opposed to the Chechens 2. Take away the failures, and Russians have 4 against Chechen 2, so the Russians have initiative again. And the next thing to do is to run a first aid check on the injury that happened last turn. So, had this unit suffered 5 casualties, it would have been termed wiped out, which means that it couldn't have performed a first aid check on itself. Whilst there are still combat effective figures in that unit though, it can do. Had it been wiped out, a neighbouring friendly unit would have had to have got within, I think it's 2 inches of it, I'll have to check that, 1 inch or 2 inches, in order to perform the check. But it can perform its own first aid check, and you roll a d6, which I'm going to do on this bit of table here. It's a 4, which means that that figure has a light wound. So what I've done is replace the white dice with the blue dice with a 1 face up to signify it's not the figure, I said figure before, it's the unit. One of the figures in the unit has a light wound. Now, I might as well discuss this at this point. All the rolls within the unit are interchangeable by and large. So if there are, say, 2 figures who are seriously wounded, you could still use that rocket-propelled grenade, and if there were another one with another kind of support weapon, you don't have to actually say which figure is carrying which weapon and so on. All the rolls are interchangeable. So it doesn't signify anything to say that the figure with the rocket-propelled grenade has a serious wound, for instance, because the figure next to him could simply exchange weapons and use the rocket-propelled grenade. That is slightly different when you're targeted by a sniper, in that he can select specific figures, but that would only crop up or be of importance when the unit had some kind of specialist figure within it, such as a medic. So in other words, we don't need to really worry, other than to know that there is 1 light wound in that unit, and what that means is the same as with the Russian tank crew, that the figure is still combat effective, and there's no need to take a morale check or anything on that unit for seeing a comrade seriously wounded or killed. But if they want to move rapidly, they have to test against their troop type in order to be moved at anything other than tactical speed. And it's also in turn 3 that we can bring the first of the Chechen reinforcements onto the table via one of the hotspots, and that's diced for now. So there are 5 hotspots, and what you do is you roll a d6, and if you roll a 6, the Chechens can choose which hotspot the unit emerges from. Otherwise you have to number each one, and they come out of the dice facing that you roll. So we're going to call that one 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Now at the moment that hotspot hasn't been neutralised. That Russian unit have to remain stationary there for a turn, and they haven't done that yet. The turn 3 is when they're going to be able to neutralise that hotspot. So if we do roll a 5 and the Chechens emerge from that, they have a number of options, one of which is to immediately engage in close combat with that unit. So let's see what happens, but it'll be interesting if we do get close combat. So I'll roll it on this bit of table here, and it's a 3. So they're going to emerge from that hotspot there. Right, so there's the unit, 6 figures, Similar composition to the others. There's a leader, 3 riflemen, an RPG and an SAW. And what's interesting about this is that I reckon that unit, I'm defining that as low so it can be seen over. So I think that both these units here have line of sight, albeit they're in cover, behind lots of cover, because they've got one lot of cover there, another lot there, and it's all cumulative. But what I'm going to do now, it makes the game a little bit more interesting, is the initiative player now has to declare if he's going to put any of his units on Overwatch. So I'm going to say that this unit here is going to be on Overwatch, and what that means is that in the turn 3 I'm going to fire with the anti-tank missile onto that unit there, and if they react in any way, the Overwatch have the possibility of interrupting their reaction. So you'll see how that works in a moment. And this Russian unit here has to remain stationary in order to neutralise that hotspot. So I think the first thing I will do is the Russian player is going to order these guys forward. So they've moved forward and the Chechen player hasn't reacted to that in any way. So I then move this unit back again over the fence, and this time the Chechen player is going to react by firing at them with the sniper again. We know from the previous turns that he can roll 2 dice against the Russians' 4. Alright, so that's a fail, that's a fail, and I can see immediately that there's no hits because the Chechens rolled a 6 and there's an 8 there, which can easily match it. So no hits from the sniping fire. Right, now this fearsome weapon here, the anti-tank missile, is going to fire at that group of Chechen rebels there. They are going to react by attempting to move, and they are going to try and move out of the range of fire into this building here. And the Overwatch unit here will try and also, they spot the move and they try and preempt their reaction and lay some fire down on them before they get to move. So I'll show you how this chain of events works. Right, so the first thing you have to do is take a reaction test between the Overwatch unit here and the Chechen unit that is reacting to the fire from the anti-tank missile. So you roll 2 dice, 1 for each side. These, according to the troop quality, which is D8s for both, but you add 1 to the dice roll of the Overwatch unit. So the Chechens have rolled an 8, and the Overwatch unit have rolled a 5, to which you add 1, so they still haven't managed to preempt the movement of the Chechen unit. And then you roll a test between the anti-tank unit and the Chechens, and this time the Chechens have failed, whereas the anti-tank unit rolled a 5. So what that means is that the anti-tank unit is going to be able to fire at the Chechens before they move, but they then will be able to move before the Overwatch unit gets to fire at them. Right, so the unit firing has 3 figures. So you start with 3 dice. They are firing a heavy support weapon which has a firepower of 3 dice, meaning there's another 3 there, and they are operating as a team, which gives them another 2 dice. Their optimum range is, because it's a support weapon, is double the troop types, which is 16 inches, so the target is well outside of 16 inches. So they get to roll 8 dice. So that means that as far as the Russian unit goes, they start with a base defence number which is going to be the lowest of the number of figures or the fire dice. There are 8 fire dice and 6 figures, so they're going to start with 6 figures, 6 dice, 4, 5, 6, and then they are behind this cover here and this cover here, and it's cumulative, and I'm not going to allow this cover here. I'm going to say that the tank can see across through that gap. Anti-tank gun, so that's another 2 dice for that, and then they get another 1 for being in cover, which is different, remember, from being behind cover, so they get to roll 9 dice in defence. Right, so we get rid of all the fails, which are anything below a 4. There's a few 3s here can come off. 3 there, 1 and a 3. So the Russians have got 8, 7, another 8 there, another 8 there, and a 4. And the Chechens have got to try and match those. You don't have to put these in descending order. It's not like sword and spear. You can do what you want with them. I mean, that 8 there can clearly match that 8 there, but they haven't got another 8, so they're not going to be able to match that one or this one, whatever they do. So that 7 can go against that 7. It really doesn't matter what they do now. That 5 will beat that 4. So that means there are 2 hits there that they can't do anything about. Right, so we put white micro dice with the 2 uppermost there to signify there are 2 casualties there, but we don't know what type of wounds they are at the moment. Now the Chechens have to take 2 morale tests, one for having taken casualties and another for being fired at by an intimidating weapon, a terrifying weapon. So they have 4 combat effective figures left, and remember that they've got a higher morale than the Russians. They've got D10, so they're going to roll 4 D10s. First test. Right, they've got 1 fail and 3 passes, so they passed the first test. Second test. All passes, so they got away with it. So that means now they are free to make their move and move into the building. They are, having moved into the building. And I forgot to say, by the way, I'm going to treat these buildings as though they give you protection from all directions. They're actually constructed so they've only got 2 facades, but I'm going to treat them as though they are what's described as semi-destroyed buildings. But if you were fired at from this angle here, they would still give you the solid cover. Keep things simple. Right, so the Russians now have activated every unit. They're not allowed to do anything with the Overwatch unit other than put it on Overwatch, so and everything else has either moved or fired or not moved, as the case is in that one, because they're busy neutralising that hotspot. So it's now over to the Chechens to perform tasks with any of the units that haven't reacted, and the first thing I'm going to do is take another. I think these guys are going to move behind the car because you can see over the car, so that will take, that's a 6-inch move, and then they'll still be within 8 inches of the tank crew, so they'll take an opposed troop quality test in order to see if they've spotted them, and if they have, then they can exchange fire. Right, there we go, so we're doing opposed troop quality test. Right, so remember that the different troop qualities, the tank crew are only D6, whereas the chechens are D8. And the chechens pass this time and the Russians fail, so that means that the tank crew are no longer hidden and the chechens are allowed to move and fire, so they can now fire at that hidden unit. Right, now the Russian tank crew are allowed to fire back, so you have to take a reaction test to see whether they even fire and preempt the Chechen fire, but they're rolling D6s against D8s again, but it's just a straightforward opposed dice roll. So the Chechens fell, and so do the Russians, but that is interesting because the Russians have the initiative, which means that they fire first. So let's work that out. The Russians are firing first then. There are 4 figures, but this distance is about 7 inches from the centre of that unit there to the central figure in that unit there is just over 6 inches, it's about 7 inches, which means, if you remember in the setup of the game, I said that these guys are armed with, one's armed with a pistol and the others are armed with submachine guns. Now, the pistol can't be fired beyond the optimum range of the unit, and they're only D6s, which means it can't be fired beyond 6 inches. So only 3 of the figures are firing, and the SMGs are much more effective in close range, and so there are no bonuses added, there's just 3 dice roll. So the Chechens will start off with a defence of 3 because there's 3 firepower dice and, as it happens, 3 figures. They get 1 for the cover of the car and 1 for being in cover, so they're in cover and they're behind cover. So they're going to roll 5 dice, 5 D8s against the tank crew's 3 D6. Right, so 3 fails, 2 fails, and we're left with, the Russians have rolled a 6 and a 5, which is about as good as they can do. But the Chechens have got 2 8s there, which easily counter them. So no hits from the tank crew, so now the Chechens get to fire back. Right, the Chechens have 3 figures, so that's 3 dice. They are D8s, so they are within optimum range, so they get 4th dice for that. And one of the weapons is a grenade launcher, which is defined as a light support weapon, so that gives them 1 extra dice for that. So what's that, 5 dice. So there are 4 figures receiving the fire, so they start with a base of 4, and they're behind cover and in cover, so they get another 2. That gives them 6 to roll against the Chechens' 5. But again, it's 6 D6s against 5 D8s. And again, get rid of the below 4s. And the Chechens have got 2 8s there, so that's going to be bad news for the Russians. A 6 and a 4. So the 2 8s can't be matched with D6s, but they can match, they've got 2 6s there that can match those 2. So the Russian tank crew take 2 hits. So for the time being we put down a micro dice, a white dice with a 2 facing upwards to signify there were 2 hits. When in the next turn, when we come to do the first aid check, it will be important to determine whether the figure that's already got a light wound is one of the ones that have received a second wound, but that won't come into it for the time being, only when we do the first aid check. So we have to take a morale check now, and 2 of the figures are injured, so there are only 2 combat effective at the moment, so we're going to roll 2 morale dice. And the tank crew, their troop quality is 6, but their morale is D8 like the rest of the Russians. Right, so 1 fail, 1 pass, that means that they're pinned. So if they have any movement, they're supposed to seek cover, but they are already in cover, and for the time being their morale goes down from D6, and I don't think you're allowed to go down to D4. I'll just check on the rules, but that might have implications for their status. Sorry, I had that wrong. It's not their morale that goes down, it's their troop quality goes down, and you can't go down to a D4, so that means that they can't perform any actions while they're pinned, which is for the rest of this turn, but they're not going to be required to do so anyway. Right, now I've still got to move 2 more units of chechens. This unit here I'm going to make a rapid move so that they're behind this wall here and can fire at the tank crew as well. And that unit there, I'm going to move into that building there. So there's the Chechen unit lined up against behind the wall with all their weaponry pointing at the tank crew. I could actually, they made a rapid move, they could still fire if they wanted to, but I don't think it's worth it really, so I'm not going to bother this go. And equally over there, that the unit didn't have enough movement. You have to move a tactical move to get into a building. They didn't have enough distance to get them into the building, so I've lined them up outside it, and they could potentially have been fired at by the Overwatch unit, which can still react to actions in the reactive player's turn, but you're firing over 1, 2, 3 pieces of cover, all of which are cumulative, so I decided not to bother. I didn't think it would have any effect.